Good morning, everyone. If you are not in class today, today is Unit 2, Day 4. Our topic for class discussion is determining effective and ineffective rhetoric, mainly with other people's work, but hopefully you can transfer it then to your own writing to learn what makes your message more effective. On this slide, it goes through the agenda. You can see there's a lot of content involved in this message or on this agenda. So that means that I will be talking really briefly. You've got to slow down a lot more and look at the content in order to do each of these activities. I wanted to pick an author today for you to look at who has, in my opinion, uses rhetoric effectively. Harper Lee, and her real name is Nellie Lee. Anyway, she is the author of To Kill a Mockingbird from the story takes place in the 1930s. She wrote it. It was published in the 1960s. And it takes place in the South, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the book. If you are not in class, you won't have a copy of the book, so I included an excerpt from the story for you to look at for part of your academic notes. To do that, I want you to understand that context plays a great role in understanding rhetoric. So we're going to watch a short video clip of the 1960s and their reaction to Harper Lee's book when it was published. And that will give us some understanding of the context of the story. So in class, I'm going to have everyone read for about 5 minutes on their own, pick a part of the book to read. For you guys, if you are not in class, I want you to stop and read the excerpt that I included from her book, one of the chapters, and get a feel for what Harper Lee does in her text. And one of the things that you will find is she weaves so many rhetorical modes into her writing. Like she'll have examples. She's great at storytelling, of course. She exemplifies ideas in a creative way through the voice of a 6-year-old narrator. So if you'll notice on this slide also, it talks about, rather than what Harper Lee shows, that is a word that students oftentimes, when they are discussing rhetoric, it's their go-to word, and it's the last word you ever want to use for a verb. So in your resource packet, I have included a whole list of verbs. I have a few of them here on this page, but it's a full page of verbs that you will use in your sentences when you respond to text rhetorically. So look at that and get a feel for what she does to make her writing work. There are several devices that you can use to learn how to break apart text. And the way that people organize a rhetorical analysis essay can be, if I wanted to teach this to younger students, I would probably have them organize their paragraphs according to one of these first two models, because there's no guesswork involved. The third one is the one that we are going to use when we eventually get to our essay. But in order to understand how to break apart text, I want you to become familiar with all three of them. They're all excellent devices for having us know what to say when we look at text and have conversations about what writers are doing or speakers are doing. So the first one is did slip. This is put together by a bunch of English teachers, and it's used across the country. And so it's a mnemonic device. And notice that every word of did slip stands for something specific that you can look at when you analyze texts: diction, imagery, details, syntax, language, and poetic techniques. And when you put all of them together, it's a way for you to analyze the tone of the text much more effectively. So that mnemonic device works well to break apart a text. The AP organization has put together a mnemonic device for analyzing nonfiction texts, which is what most rhetorical analysis essays will be about, will be nonfiction texts. So some of you may have seen this, even if you haven't taken an AP class. This is called Soapstone. So you'll notice that when I typed it, I capitalized the first 6 letters, but then each of those stand for something, and then collectively you can come up with or analyze the tone better. So in this case, if you're looking at nonfiction text, analyze the speaker, the occasion of what's going on when the speaker gives his or her message, who is the intended audience, what is the purpose of the text, what is the overall subject, and finally the T leads you into the word tone. So each of those mnemonic devices you can turn into a paragraph if you wanted to analyze a text using Soapstone. The one that we are going to use in this class was organized by a college professor. He used the work of Aristotle, and so I put up at the top that Aristotle and David Jolliffe are kind of responsible for this strategy. So Aristotle, of course, I talked about this earlier in this unit, came up with this concept of a rhetorical situation: exigence, audience, and purpose. The word that you probably don't know is exigence. This is what is kind of the gnawing effect, like in the stomach, that would make someone have to speak out, have to talk about an issue. And of course, audience and purpose tie into rhetorical situations that we have already learned about. We're going to go into each of these in a little bit more detail in just a second. Then David Jolliffe says that and also Aristotle says, if you're analyzing a text, you need to focus on ethos, pathos, and logos of the text. So that's another way you can organize the work. Another way is to look at the way the text is arranged. How is it structured? Is there a formal thesis sentence? Is it an implied thesis sentence? Why did the writer choose to arrange the text in a certain way? Why is the introduction what it is and the conclusion what it is? So looking at the structure of the text. And then finally, the last section is surface features. These are all of the tools that writers can use to get messages across. And there are so many of them. Back in your resource booklet, after page 1, we looked at it, I think on day 1, there's a whole set of terms. These are types of diction, style, imagery, figurative language. And of course, there are more than just some of these surface features that I've talked about. So let's dive into this a little bit more specifically with an example. So I picked the Gettysburg Address. And for those of you who are not here, you won't be here a part of the conversation. You need to pause this video and read both the notes on the slide as well as the comments that I put in the teaching resource at the bottom of this slide in the teaching notes. So I go into it a lot more in detail about analyzing the rhetorical situation of Gettysburg. Now, of course, this is Lincoln goes to Gettysburg about 4 or 5 months after the famous battle where over 60,000 people lost their lives, and he goes there to dedicate a memorial for all of the soldiers. Most of the soldiers were sadly put into mass graves, and they were organized according, if you've been to Gettysburg, they're organized according to states that fought in the Civil War. And the ones that the soldiers didn't have their dog tags, they were in unmarked graves with crosses on each of them. Anyway, why did Lincoln go there? What's his purpose? This is what you could talk about as far as rhetorical situation. So the exigence, again, goes into that in more detail. The writer, what do we know about Lincoln in this case? Of course, he's kind of stuck between two parts of the country that think so philosophically differently. And he needs to address all of them because he recognizes that the union, all of the states, not just the union part. So as far as writers are concerned, for any kind of text, though, if you look at the bullet list that I've included, you can see a lot of ways to think about why a writer says what he or she says. And a lot of it has to do with their experience in life, their political beliefs, their education, and so forth. If we're talking about rhetorical situation and purpose, there aren't too many of them, but we could spend all day on them. So what is the writer really trying to do? There might be a couple of each of these in a passage, but usually one or each writer has one specific purpose in mind. And then, just like writers, we need to analyze our audience. So who are the people that are there? Just in the Gettysburg Address, for example, all of these people came to be a part of a very, very solemn experience. Most of them lived in the North. Lincoln recognized that. And they also loved long speeches in that time period. There's in the Gettysburg Address, I'm sidetracking here, but one of the speakers spoke for over 2 hours, and Lincoln then gets up and gives a 3-paragraph speech. And the audience was quite stunned, actually, and it was only when the main speaker, who recognized the power of the Gettysburg Address, stands up and says, "This will go down in history as one of the greatest speeches of all time," everyone else actually finally started to clap for the president. So those are part of rhetorical situation. Then we move into the context of what's going on. It plays a part into what people say and what they don't say. So with that idea in mind, to analyze text, we have to think like the curiosity of a 5-year-old, try to see something new, and then I'll also think like a detective, where we're just zooming on every word and the arrangement of every sentence. I mean, getting into the nuts and bolts of what what a writer is doing. So you kind of have to balance those two extremes, and that's what makes a good analytical thinker. So sometimes rhetoric works and it doesn't. I put 2 examples of when rhetoric doesn't here, 2 great examples that I will explain in class, but pause and watch both of them to see what happens when rhetoric doesn't work. So in class, and for you as part of your assignment, you are going to turn in a chart that we will do in class, but if you're home, you have to do it on your own. We're going to look at 4 examples of rhetoric. So pull out the graphic organizer in your extra handouts, and you will see that it has a bunch of boxes on it. And it's pretty self-explanatory of how you fill it out. But the first one we're going to look at is, and I don't have time to talk about these at all on this video, but Mr. Collins' marriage proposal. This comes from Pride and Prejudice. This is an example of what something doesn't work. I put the text to his proposal in the teacher notes. It's also in your resource booklet. Pause the video, read it, and then fill out the chart. The second one is Rosie the Riveter poster. Do the same thing here. I've added a bunch of resources for those of you who are not here on this slide and the next one, that you can think about the poster itself to analyze it and break it apart and respond to it in your notes. So there's the second one. Third one is a letter from a 12-year-old girl to Albert Einstein, and she sent him a letter asking him if he prays or not. And so I want you to pause the video, read the letter, and decide how effective Einstein's response letter to Phyllis is. And again, I'd put that response letter in the teacher's note and your resource booklet. The fourth one is a commercial, considered the greatest commercial of all time, from 1984. It was done by Apple. I have 2 slides here to give you some more of context information. Watch the commercial and decide the effectiveness, and in this case, why it was a home run, even though most people at that time didn't think it was. Okay, finally, your homework assignment is to read Lincoln's second inaugural address in your packet, and using all of those surface feature tools in your resource booklet, identify 10 of them. what they are and